The cable that I'm holding here is worth $1,000 US. Now you might immediately think that that's absolutely crazy and ludicrous, and I don't blame you for that. It's certainly a lot more than I would probably ever choose to spend on a cable for myself, but I have to say that I'm really glad I've had a chance to take a listen to this one because it's mighty impressive. Let's jump in now and talk about what I mean. This particular cable is the Effect Audio Fusion 1, and it's apparently the first in a series of cables coming from Effect Audio, and they're all going to be various versions of the Fusion range. This cable's come out just today on the 10th of August 2023, so this is one of the first reviews you'll probably see of this one. And if you're in the market for a top-end cable and you don't shy away from spending this sort of money on cables, you're going to be really interested in this one, I think. For those of you that might never spend this much money on cables, you might also be interested to take a listen to what I'm going to tell you about this cable. In case there's other ways, you can pick up something approximating this for a lower price just by understanding what's going on inside. Now, I'm not suggesting that a cheap cable that happens to use the same metals will sound the same as this one, because there's a lot more to a cable than just the wire it uses. It's also the geometry, the way those wires are laid out and wrapped and spiraled around each other. But you can at least get the sense of what a combination of metals like this one might sound like and whether that's good for you. Before I get into telling you what this cable's made of and how it sounds, I do want to mention some of the marketing. If you happen to go and look on the website and they share any of the marketing that was sent to me as part of the press release for this one, I do have to say that the marketing for this, for me at least, goes a little bit over the top. There's pages upon pages of explanation of the kind of origins and the thinking behind this one. There's a lot of references back to the ancient wonders of the world. And so just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, here are the cues, and I'm going to have to read them off my notes here. Here are the different cues they've taken from the ancient wonders when putting the Fusion 1 together. They've wanted it to be luxurious and exclusive like the mausoleum at Halicarnassus. They've wanted it to be impressive and eye-catching like the Colossus of Rhodes. They wanted precision and clarity, which apparently draws from the Temple of Artemis. Power and intensity like the statue of Zeus. They wanted it to be strong and durable like the Great Pyramid of Giza. Flexible and ergonomic like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. And then the guidance and direction provided by the Lighthouse of Alexandria. And I want to start by saying that for me, and I hope Effect Audio don't take offense at this, for me, this level of marketing starts to feel a little bit wanky. Sorry to use that term, and again, I don't mean any offense to Effect Audio. But as I started to read through this, I started thinking that this was just going to be an exercise in marketing jargon, big words, fancy concepts, and then an overpriced cable, if I'm being honest. That's how I came into this review. The cable looks and feels wonderful, don't get me wrong there, but I was just worried that there was too much hype from a marketing point of view, that it was going to be very hard for the cable to live up to. Of course, it's nice to have design intentions and have a specific goal that you're targeting when you're building a product. And so maybe that's what this was, but I don't know if it needed to be communicated with such an extensive and elaborate communication of these elements. To continue the theme of the ancient wonders and the mythology, it started making me wonder if this was a bit like Icarus, where it was set up with these lofty goals, it was going to fly too close to the sun and crash back to Earth. And so before I tell you exactly what happened when I had to listen to it, let me quickly tell you what's actually built in here. So we're going to move away from the marketing and the conceptual stuff and talk about what's really going on inside the Fusion 1. The design in here, as the Fusion name would suggest, uses multiple different metals. You've got some gold-plated silver, you've got some pure silver, and then you've also got some pure copper. And that's all combined, and this goes back to what I said before, it's all combined in different geometries, different ways of twisting, combining and bundling the wires to produce this fusion of wires to carry the signal. The end result is a beautiful feeling wire. It's got this nice thick, it's just a 2-wire twist that obviously within each wire, and you'll see this in the B-roll, within each wire there's multiple strands going on and they're all kind of woven and twisted together. But it makes for a cable that just sits really beautifully. It feels wonderful as well. All your terminations have these beautiful kind of, it's almost like a brushed, burnished gold sort of look with some silver accents on there. It's a really lovely cable to interact with in every possible way. The one I've got here has got 2-pin connectors, and I've currently got it connected to the THIEAUDIO Prestige. But of course you can also get other connectors as well via the Effect Audio website. The final thing I'll mention about the cable before we talk about how it sounds is that it's also using the Effect Audio Termex system. Termex is just the Effect Audio name for their swappable end terminations. And so you can have this with a 3.5mm, 4.4mm, or 2.5mm termination. I've got the 3.5mm connected now because most of my testing was with the Mojo 2 from Cord. But inside this box, you can also see the 2.5 and the 4.4mm terminations there. And it's a very simple system. You just unscrew the kind of sheathing that goes around the plug. You then pop out the termination that you've got in there, pop in the new one. There's a little locator spline that helps you get it in the right spot, make sure everything's aligned the right way, and then you screw it back up and away you go. And so it's a nice system. It's not unique. Lots of brands are doing it, but I like the fact that if you're buying a cable at this level, you can get the swappable connectors. So it's always going to work for you with any different device. 3.5, 2.5mm or 4.4mm. You will of course be limited by the choice of the connectors into the IEM. So you're going to end up with an MMCX cable or a 2-pin cable, whatever you might choose. But it is nice to have the kind of amplifier end at least be a little bit versatile. And so with all that said, let's start talking about how this sounds, because we're talking $1,000 for a cable here. That's more than most IEMs you're going to buy on the market. Obviously there's IEMs out there worth thousands and thousands of dollars, but there's not very many of you out there that are buying that level of IEM. It's kind of a shame that I didn't still have the Fur Audio Radon 6 here when I was testing this one. I would have loved to put a cable like this on a truly, truly high-end IEM. But as it is, I still had 2 really nice IEMs to play with. And the first one, which I've already mentioned, is the THIEAUDIO Prestige. And so how I went about doing my testing here was I took the stock IEMs with their stock cable, and then I stepped from the stock cable up to Effect Audio's own Aries S8W cable. That's a lovely, heavy gauge, pure copper Litz cable, which I think is absolutely fantastic. It's also far, far cheaper at just a couple $100, or actually just under $300, I think it is. So in the scheme of things, it's a lot for a cable, but it's nowhere near $1,000. So I went from the stock cable to the Aries S8W and then up to the Fusion 1. Listening to Stranger Things by Molly Tuttle, and the stock cable with the Prestige sounds great. The Prestige are an IEM that I really like. I wouldn't go so far as saying I love them, but I do really like them, and they sounded fantastic in their stock form. The strings in this track had fantastic sense of attack and clarity and articulation. The bass is full and solid through the Prestige with the stock cable. And then the vocal was nicely separated from the mix and had a good balance of body and texture as well. So that sense of resonance from the chest, but also the breath and the texture in the vocal too. In general, it sounded great. Moving over to the Effect Audio Aries S8W, and what I heard was a fuller overall vocal sound, and also a richer sound in the guitars as well. I think using the Aries S8W probably provided slightly better in terms of more natural tonal balance to the Prestige. It helped to give a bit more weight and body to the mid-range, which these can sometimes lack just a little bit. But it did come at the cost of having a slight trade-off where that sense of articulation and attack on the strings, so the guitar strums and things like that, that was a little bit reduced when I was using the Aries S8W. Everything did still sound really good, but I missed a little bit of that sense of clarity and energy on things like those guitar strums. Moving over then to the Fusion 1 with its combination of gold-plated silver, and pure copper, and what I heard was actually even more weight in things like the guitar. There was more resonance, more richness to the sound. Interestingly though, there was more of a tilt back towards texture in the vocals. Not as much as the stock cable, but it was definitely a better balance of kind of texture and air without losing out on resonance and body. The image focus became slightly better with the Fusion 1, and I felt like the bass had a touch more fullness and a touch more weight behind it as well. All 3 cables sounded fantastic, but the Fusion 1 just had this interesting combination of a little bit of extra texture compared to the pure copper cable, but also a bit more sense of weight and body compared to the stock cable. And even compared to the copper cable, it was quite fascinating how this played out. I feel like the sense of attack and articulation on things like the guitar strums and the plucking and things like that was probably closer to what the copper cable was doing. It was very smooth overall and didn't quite have the energy and attack of the stock cable, but it was very refined, and by no means did it lose a sense of clarity overall for the IEMs. It just wasn't as attacking or as kind of articulated as the stock cable. And what I found really interesting was that as I thought about it, as I listened more and more to the Fusion 1 on the Prestige, I felt like it was allowing me to kind of explore the music more. Compared to the stock cable and the Aries S8W, it was refined and it had a sense of body and richness to it, but it also had a wonderful sense of clarity and separation in a very smooth way that made it relaxing and easy to listen to, but also made it possible for me to really mentally wander through the mix, to hear what was going on, where it was placed in space. It was this wonderful combination of easy to listen to and highly detailed, highly resolved, and highly accessible if I wanted to go exploring. As I've flicked back and forth, I think the Fusion 1 is clearly my favourite cable that I've tried on an IEM like the Prestige. And what that means is an IEM that's got a little bit of extra treble energy to it. Overall, it's got a good sense of tonal balance that maybe leans just a little bit towards treble. And that means that I think it should work really well on IEMs like the Unique Melody Mest Mark II or the Mark III, which I hope to review soon. It's going to work really well on those IEMs that have got that treble emphasis, that don't go too far. This is not going to completely transform the IEM, but it is going to help just to smooth off if you've got a slightly kind of treble happy IEM. Maybe the IEMs come with a silver-plated copper cable, which can make things sound a bit edgier. This is going to help to kind of balance that out, keep a sense of refinement or bring a sense of refinement to that sound without flattening and dulling the treble too much. Another IEM that I had here and was able to test with is the Soundz Avant IEM. This is a custom-made IEM that's made in Greece. I've got it in for review. It's a very interesting IEM and I look forward to sharing it with you soon. But what's kind of cool about the Avant is it's got a very different tuning from what I had in the Prestige, and it's also got two different modes. It's got a very neutral kind of studio monitor tuning, but then you can also flick a switch on the IEM to give it a bit of extra bass and body in the sound as well. So I was really interested to hear how that IEM performed with the Fusion 1. It's a pure balanced armature IEM with 10 balanced armatures per side, and without giving too much away, it's also a wonderful sounding IEM. And so much like what I did with the Prestige, I set up myself to test the Soundz Avant with the stock cable and then move through the Aries S8W and up to the Fusion 1. For all this testing, I had the Avant in its neutral mode, so that kind of very reference studio monitor type sound. And I was listening to the Future Strings variation by Sekou Keita. Hopefully I've said that right. Starting off again with the stock cable, and the strings are clear and crisp from the Avant. I did feel like in their neutral mode, things like the cellos and the bass could have done with a bit more weight and a bit more body. I felt like the upper strings, so the violas and the violins, were just overpowering the cellos slightly in terms of the tonal balance. And when Sekou Keita's kora comes in, that's the African stringed instrument that he plays, it had a wonderful sense of attack and clarity on the notes. Later on in the track, there's some woodwind instruments, and you can clearly hear things like the texture of the reeds and the wind passing through things like clarinets. It was a beautiful listening experience, and it didn't really leave me wanting anything more, other than that bit of extra bass in the cellos, but that could have come with a flick of the switch up into what they call immersive mode. And I'll go through this in full detail, what the switch is doing, what frequencies it affects. I'll cover all of that in the separate review of the Soundz Avant. So for now, I just wanted to keep everything in that very neutral mode to really get a sense of what the Fusion 1 was doing. Moving over then to the pure copper Aries S8W, and I probably should mention at the moment that the stock cable with the Soundz Avant is a silver-plated copper, I believe. So moving over now to a pure copper Litz, what I heard was a smoother sound from the strings, and a sound that I think was actually better balanced with the rest of the instruments. That also meant that it brought a bit of extra warmth to the cellos, which further helped the balance of the tonality, and the orchestra overall just sounded more complete. To this point, I was definitely preferring the Aries S8W over the stock cable in the neutral mode of the Avant. When Sekou Keita's chorus started coming in, the sound of it was a little bit more muted in the clarity and the articulation of the sound, but it also allowed me to hear more of the resonance and richness of it. Again, I'm not talking about it becoming muffled, rolled off in the treble, blunted in the notes, or anything like that. It just pulled back a tiny bit on that sense of upper end clarity or articulation, and so it balanced out the sense of attack with the sense of body and resonance. I liked it personally. I thought it was a bit better on this particular IEM, but of course this is one of those things that's going to be very preferential. Some people love lots of attack, lots of leading edge energy and clarity. That's going to be up to you. As I went back and forth between the stock cable and the Aries S8W, I felt like what was happening was that the stock cable separated sounds a bit more, it pulled apart the music a bit more, whereas the Aries S8W, you lost a little bit of that separation and clarity, but what you gained in return, for me at least, was a better sense of tonal balance. And this is often the case for me. I find often with silver-plated cables, I do find that I end up preferring a pure copper cable because everything just sounds more right. It's almost like the silver plating somehow puts a bit of emphasis into the treble, or at least a bit of emphasis into the sense of attack. The way the transients hit is a little bit sharper, a little bit harder with silver plating, and I generally prefer copper, pure copper I mean. But putting that aside for a moment, let's now talk about what happens when we go to a hybrid cable. The fusion again of those all different metals, we've got gold-plated silver, silver and copper again. Moving over now to the Fusion 1, what I heard here was that now the strings were both smooth, like they were from the copper cable, but also really textured, like they were from the stock cable. Again, the tonal balance was fantastic with the Fusion 1. Definitely for me at least, it's better than with the stock cable on the Avant. And the separation of the sounds was nothing short of exceptional, but very importantly, not forced. This is the thing that started to become clear to me as I went through this process. The sound from the Fusion 1 is very refined and relaxed, but incredibly technically capable. Everything's separated, everything's defined, everything's available to listen to, but nothing's forced, nothing's enhanced. It just sounds right in almost every situation. With the Fusion 1, I felt like the sound was just a little bit brighter overall than with the pure copper Aries S8W cable. And so what that meant was that I again went back to wanting a bit more weight in things like the cellos and the bass. And in some ways I think that's a good thing. That says to me that the Fusion 1 is more like the stock cable on these earphones. It's not taking away what the designers intended for the earphone. If they've designed it with a silver-plated cable and that cable brings a bit of attack and edge to the sound, then the IEM will have been tuned for that. Whether you like the tuning or not, that's another question. But what I'm finding is that the Fusion 1 kind of hangs on more to the natural tonality that's been designed into the IEM, but it delivers it all in a more refined way. It helps to smooth out rough edges, not smooth out the overall sound, if that makes sense. When the chorus starts playing, I have to say it sounded perfect, and that's what I wrote in my notes. The chorus just sounded like it was in the room with me. The attack was right, the richness and the tonality and the harmonics were right, it just sounded superb. And that's probably really a great way to sum up the Fusion 1. Everything just sounds right. Whatever I connected this up to in terms of the music, the source, and the IEM at the end, everything sounded right. It sounded the best of what it could be. The Fusion 1 manages to somehow balance clarity with smoothness. It increases separation without becoming unnatural and incoherent. It's just quite a marvel of a cable. And again, I'm not sitting here suggesting it's going to transform your IEMs. It's not going to be a huge shift. What it does though is it's kind of like if you were able to take a car and put a special fuel in it just to get that perfect kind of smooth running engine, perfect levels of performance, maximize what it's capable of. That's what the Fusion 1's doing. For me, it's maximizing whatever the IEM is capable of without twisting it or turning it into something different. Now, of course, this brings us back to the question, is the Fusion 1 worth $1,000? I can't answer that question. As I said in the opening, I would struggle to spend $1,000 on an IEM cable. It's going beyond what I feel like is comfortable for me. But if you're somebody watching this who either has a huge collection of IEMs and you'd love to have one premium cable that can service all of your IEMs, then this could be a good option. Or if you're someone that's happily spent $3,000 or $4,000 on an IEM, maybe you've bought some Vision Ears or some Fur Audios or some of those other super premium IEMs, Unique Melody of course comes to mind, 64 audio as well. If you've bought some of those, then you again might want to invest in what I think could be one of the best cables on the market to get the most out of those IEMs. Having said that, I'm not for a second going to sit here and say it's worth $1,000 because that's way too hard to define. What I am going to say is that having tried lots of different IEMs and different IEM cables over the years, some of which are priced right up alongside this one, this is easily for me the best cable I've ever tried. And it's the best fit across multiple IEMs that I've ever tried as well. And specifically, where I find it to be the best is in terms of clarity, tonal accuracy, separation, and the overall sense of refinement it brings to the sound. It's an IEM cable that for me would become a reference. It would become the way that I work out what any IEM is actually capable of. I'd connect it up, I'd listen to the IEM, and that's how I would judge it. not with the stock cable, because this is going to absolutely blow away, I think, any stock cable you're likely to find. And so I know some of you are going to think this is absolutely crazy. That's fine. Others will be wondering where you can order. There's a link in the description down below. It's not an affiliate. I don't get any money back for this one. But this is a cable that I'm 100% going to recommend if it fits your budget, your tastes, and your priorities. If it doesn't fit your priorities, there's lots of other great cables for much less money, such as the Effect Audio Aries S8W, which I also love and which does come quite close to this. But if you want the best of the best, I definitely think you should check out the Fusion 1. And so as always, I hope this video has been useful, helpful, and informative. If it has, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and ring the notification bell if you haven't already. Don't forget, the Soundz Avant review is coming up soon. These are a wonderful IEM. They're not overly expensive. They sit under $2,000 for a truly premium sound. And I know that sounds like a lot, but if you look back at some of my recent reviews of things like the Unique Melody Multiverse Mentor, the Fur Audio Radon 6, or the Visioneers IEMs, you'll know that spending under $2,000 for what I think is a premium sounding IEM is actually not a bad deal. So make sure you subscribe if you're into IEMs and you want to hear more about the Soundz Avant. But for now, let me leave it to the music, so happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.